Historic Black Settlements of Ohio by David Meyers and Elise Myers Walker. Copyright 2020. The History Press. All rights reserved. Owing to a common border with the slave states of Virginia and Kentucky, Ohio became a destination for people of color prior to the Civil War. Some were already free, while others were fugitives, but all were seeking to escape the deep shadow of slavery. Others were brought to the Buckeye State by their owners, who had decided to give them their freedom. But none would become American citizens until the Civil War ended and the 14th Amendment was ratified. Providing all men with the right to vote, regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It is estimated there were once as many as 100 black settlements in Ohio, though little trace of them remains today. Although they were not the first, and would not be the last, the so-called Randolph slaves were the most problematic group of formerly enslaved people to settle in Ohio. And the treatment they were accorded reflected both the best and the worst qualities of the state's citizenry. John Randolph of Roanoke was regarded as a kindly master, if such a thing can be. In his will, Randolph bequeathed his slaves both their freedom and money to purchase land for them in Ohio. As executor of Randolph's will, Judge William Lee of Virginia purchased 3,200 acres of land for the former slaves in Mercer County, Ohio. In 1846, nearly 400 of them arrived by canal boat in the town of New Bremen. However, a large crowd of angry white citizens refused to allow them to disembark. As a result, the Randolph slaves were dispersed to several communities in neighboring counties. Their intended destination was Carthagena, the largest such settlement in the state, with 600 families. It had its beginnings when Augustus Waddles, a Quaker from Connecticut, decided to establish a manual trade school for blacks in 1835. Over the ensuing years, Levi Coffin, the so-called president of the Underground Railroad, helped to settle many free blacks and fugitive slaves in that area. In 1840, Charles Moore, who was biracial, platted the village of Carthagena, making it the first community in Ohio laid out by a man of color. The residents of Carthagena were blessed with good land and set about making the best of it. Mary Frances McCrae, a former slave from Kentucky, lived there for several years. Her husband and son later wrote a biography of this remarkable woman. Another resident of Carthagena, George Akers enlisted in the 55th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, where he served with distinction. Like most black settlements, Carthagena was an agrarian community, but not all of the residents were content to be farmers, so they eventually sold their land to local German farmers. Some Randolph slaves found refuge in Rossville, just across the Miami River from Piqua in Miami County. Black children in Rossville attended their own school, taught by black teachers. The annual reunion of ex-Randolph slaves started in Rossville and continued for several generations. In 1904, former slaves York Reel and Charles Joe Moten sued to recover the 3,200 acres of land in Mercer County that had been denied them, but the statute of limitations had expired. Much of Rossville was washed away in the 1913 flood. Like many of these black settlements, little remains of Rossville save for a cemetery. Another group of former Randolph slaves settled in the village of Rumley in Shelby County. Rumley was laid out in 1837, and the first two lots were sold to George and Joel Goines. The Goines brothers were free blacks who had migrated from the Lett settlement near Zanesville, Ohio. They built a hotel and livery stable and were partners in a gristmill and a sawmill. Like most black settlements, the church was of utmost importance. Rumley had 3 altogether, and 3 saloons. Rumley was connected to other nearby settlements such as Carthagena, Wren, and Middle Creek by family ties. At one time, the African American population of Rumley reached 400. But the clash between pro- and anti-slavery factions drove many of its black residents away during the Civil War. Another large black settlement was Longtown in Darke County near Greenville. In 1818, former slave James Clemens bought at least 320 acres of land and settled there with his wife, Sophia. Originally from Virginia, Clemens not only founded the community, but was instrumental in starting a school, donated land for a church, and established a cemetery. The settlement soon extended into Indiana as well, where the Union Literary Institute was established by anti-slavery Quakers. Not surprisingly, there was a lot of Underground Railroad activity in Darke County, and slave hunters would sometimes come looking for runaways. But many members of the community grew restless and were drawn to the cities. They found employment on the docks, aboard steamships, or as porters and cooks on railroads. W. E. B. Du Bois visited Darke County in 1909, possibly in search of his own roots, and was struck by how light-complected many of the residents were. It was already losing its ethnic identity. There were several settlements at the very bottom of the state in Lawrence and Gallia counties. The communities of Poke Patch, Black Fork, and Burlington were founded in the vicinity of Ohio's pioneering iron furnaces. The owners of these furnaces, men such as John Campbell, the founder of Ironton, welcomed the black men who came to them for jobs. In some instances, the owners were also active in the Underground Railroad, helping to conceal the runaway slaves who came across the Ohio River. A number of former slaves who had attained freedom for themselves did what they could to help others. Some of them are still remembered as conductors on the Underground Railroad. But many more enlisted in the Union Army. Ohio contributed more volunteers to the 55th Massachusetts Colored Infantry than any other state. And still others became entrepreneurs, educators, doctors, and writers, but to do so, most had to leave home. Although these black settlers once owned thousands of acres throughout Ohio, few of them remain in the hands of their descendants. Historic Black Settlements of Ohio tells the story of an important and often neglected chapter in Black history.